Boker Tov. My name is Jonah, and I'm coming to you from the safety and security of my home in New York, USA, with a question for Jews. I'm a Jew, and I've answered this question myself, so it's really for all of the other Jews out there. And it has to do with the current situation in the Middle East. Obviously, it's horrible right now. It's at a hair's trigger. At any point in time, the situation, as bad as it is, could escalate to a far worse situation, with rockets coming in from Hezbollah at the north, perhaps some sort of terrorist act anywhere in the world. Jews around the world face persecution. Protests have become violent and are increasing around the world, particularly in Europe and throughout the Middle East. So, where do we go from here? That's not my question for you. That's coming. Now, what's changed? Why have we gone from what was one of the most peaceful and prosperous times that Israel has had in 70 years to this horrible situation that we have today in such a short period of time, so rapidly? What's changed? What could have brought this about? Well, Israel has the same president. Iran has the same ayatollahs. Syria, Jordan, Kuwait, the Emirates, same kingdoms. Putin's still president. She's still head of the Communist Party in China. The Ayatollah's intentions are not new. They've been saying since they took over that they wanted to wipe Israel off the map. Israel's intention hasn't changed, which is to live in peace with its neighbors. What's changed? What could have changed that brought such a rapid new situation in the Middle East for Israel? Well, to understand that, don't we have to back up and understand why we got that peaceful situation and prosperous situation in Israel in the first place? It began 4.5 years ago. It began in it began really on May 2017, when President Trump went to Riyadh and held a summit that had, I think, 54 high-level leaders, representatives from 54 countries, Arab and Muslim countries there. Notably, the two that boycotted were Turkey and Iran. But from that point forward, it was clear that American policy had shifted. Trump brought in Jared Kushner to lead a new peace initiative, kept things very quiet, but he knew what the plan was. He put Jared Kushner in charge. He knew what he was trying to achieve. He knew the method, the strategies, and the tactics that they would deploy. And in the course of 4 years, Israel entered one of the most positive relationships with America and one of the most prosperous periods, peaceful and prosperous periods in its existence. And mind you, we came out of a bad situation with Obama just before that, what some people say was the worst relations for Israel. And the Palestinian threats of terror were tremendous at that time. But all that changed in May of 2017, starting in Riyadh, and culminating with the Abraham Accords just before Trump left office, which have only continued to make progress. What changed? What changed is we went backwards. What changed is we went back to the Obama years. Obama left, but Biden brought it all back. And then some. It was clear the day he was elected and before what he was planning to do. To reinitiate the Iran nuclear deal, to put pressure on Israel for the Palestinian crisis, to blame Israel. Biden set us right back to where we were. It's like we jumped right back to where we were and then some. But you know what? That was to be expected. We had an opportunity to compare. We could compare the results of the Obama years to the results of the Trump years. So when we went to the polls in 2016, Jews had a clear choice to make. It was obvious. We knew what Trump resulted in, we knew what Obama resulted in, and we knew what Biden was promising. There's no surprise today. Shouldn't come as a surprise. No, it actually comes as an affirmation. An affirmation of Trump's approach to policy in the Middle East, contrasted against the Obama policies. And how did that happen? That gets back to the question. How did Jews vote for Obama in the second term? How did Jews, more importantly, vote for Biden? How do we vote for Biden at this point? Knowing what Obama did, knowing what Trump did, and knowing what Biden promised, how could Jews have voted for Biden? Well, the answer may be contempt for conservative Israel, conservative Jewish Israel, just like they have contempt for conservatives, religious people in America. It also has to do with the absolute hate that is in so many Jews' hearts for Trump. I think voting for Biden is a sin, frankly, given what we knew was going to happen. But that's what you do when you hate. You take sin into your heart. And that's what happened. People made an emotional decision. A heartfelt hatred for Trump led to an emotional decision that was illogical, irrational, unless you hate Israel. If you hate Israel, well then, made perfect sense. So there's the question, Jews, today. Got to pick a side. Elie Wiesel was quite emphatic about this concept of you have to choose a side. When we don't choose a side, we let the oppressor win. The victim is not, and the torment does not stop when you don't choose a side. Right now, we have a side to choose. Either we choose Israel, or we don't. Not choosing Israel, not standing up for Israel, is to choose the other side. Apathy, silence, let alone support for Biden's policies, are essentially the same thing. They both give Biden and the administration and people like AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and other anti-Semites in Congress and elsewhere the room to do what they're doing. If we Jews don't stand together on the same side for Israel, we'll get more of the same that you see today. No, it'll get worse. And it could get much worse. Who's to blame? Well, we can blame anybody. We can blame everybody. Israel's not perfect. Iran's certainly not perfect. America's certainly not perfect. There's plenty of blame to go all around. But there comes a point where you have to make a choice. Liberal Jews chose Biden. And what you see today is the result of that choice. But we're cutting to a point where it's an even greater choice. Or it's just as great anyway. What are you going to choose? Are you going to choose Israel? Are you going to stand with Israel? Are you going to say, no, blame, there's no excuse, there's no way to justify what Hamas is doing? Are you going to blame Israel for taking down a tower in which our own media works side by side in a building with known terrorists? Are you going to tolerate the fact that our administration is sending money to Palestinians who are then using that money for what you see is being landed on Israel today and the tunnels? How can you, in your good conscience, not choose Israel loudly as a supporter today and denounce how this administration has brought on the situation that could easily have been predicted, was predicted in Israel today? Yes, I come to you from my peaceful driveway in New York. I got no bombs coming down on me, except Facebook, which cancels me. I got no bombs. I got no existential threat in my backyard. It's so easy for me to be virtuous. It's so easy for us Jews to be, in America, to be virtuous. Sometimes when you have guns pointed at you, missiles dropping down on your head, you don't have the luxury that we have in America to be virtuous. What do we need the courage for? We need the courage to stand by Israel. And that's a small risk, a small thing to ask for Jews in America. But it will have a huge difference. It will have a huge difference. And how do I know that? Because the election had a huge difference. Now is the time. Not tomorrow. Now is the time to stand up for Israel in every possible way that you can. In your social media, in your conversations, in your letters to editors, in petitions that you sign, in money that you donate, in causes that you support. Now's the time to stand up for Israel. Jews, one thing is clear to me. We wouldn't exist if there wasn't Israel. If there was no Israel, there'd be no Jews. If there was no Israel, there'd be no children of Israel. There'd be no Jews. If there was no Jews, there'd be no Bible as we know it today. There'd be no Bible scattered around the world today if there was no Jews, if there was no Israel. And if there was no Israel, and there were no Jews, and there was no Bible, would there be in America? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so. There would be no "in God we trust" currency. There would have been no Liberty Bell. There'd be no cause and providence for George Washington. Our founding fathers wouldn't have been inspired to risk their lives if there was no Bible that gave them safety, despite risking their lives and their families and their fortunes. They could do it because of their faith in God. They could do it because of the Bible. They could do it because of the land of Israel and the Jews. And the Jews. And all we have to do is stand up for that. It's easy. It's easy. It's the right thing to do. Every ounce of us has to be in support of Israel right now. Every ounce of us that's not is an ounce in support of Iran. Every amount of silence that we do is silence that supports Iran. It supports these failed policies of the Biden administration. Speak up now. Do what you can. Be a Jew. Be a proud Jew. Proud of Israel. In support of Israel. Now. Not tomorrow. Today. Now is the time. Never again is now. Now. Boker Tov. Have a good week.